Hello Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers, this is Zach, your secrets of longevity.com. I have a very fond memory growing up. I grew up along a river. I love living in close proximity to moving water. I always have, wherever I move to it seems. And there's a forest behind my house, between our house and the river, and at various intervals through the forest, people, perhaps my neighbors, had set up salt licks for what I thought were deer. That's the only thing that would make sense, as there's no other animals that would probably go to that. And they'd create little roofs over the salt licks to prevent the rain obviously washing it away. As a youngster, I remember at one point I didn't actually bend down and lick it, but I licked my finger and touched it and then licked it again just to find out what it was. Someone told, I think my friend said it was probably a salt lick because they lived on a farm, and I wanted to see if it was actually salt, because it made no sense to me. Why would there be a salt lick out in the wild? Like, if there's no salt in big chunks in the wild, why would an animal want to come up to a salt lick and just randomly lick it? Like, what benefit are they getting? So that's been something that has always stayed in my mind as very peculiar. And when I got into looking into health, the first things I was coming up against were a lot of negativity about added salt in the diet, meaning sodium chloride, the mineral salt that people add on their food. And I went along with that whole bandwagon for a long time, was anti-sodium chloride. I was getting a lot of sodium, thankfully, from celery, as I was doing celery juice almost daily. So I was very fortunate that I didn't run into health problems that can sometimes come from sodium deficiency. And what we do know now, which I'll be discussing in this video, is that there's a whole myriad of benefits that come from salt, and the negatives of salt are really quite exaggerated, and there's only very particular times in which you want to be very cautious about really limiting your sodium chloride intake. The whole blood pressure going up from consuming salt is basically a myth. In fact, some people that can actually have their blood pressure lowered by consuming salt in the diet. And when we talk about salt, we're talking about the best quality salt possible, sea salt. Rock salts, I'd say, would come in second because they're not as complete in their mineral content as sea salt has 92 different mineral elements in it, which are somewhat usable by the body depending on in what form they're going to be found. And of course you want a clean source for that. That goes without saying for any kind of food, supplement, herb, etc. You want to have a clean source for it. So going back to that whole idea of animals in the wild actually going for salt, and this not computing in my mind, was it just a pure addiction that when someone or an animal tastes salt, they get addicted to it and want to keep using it? Well, as it turns out, that's not the case. Most people who think they're addicted to salt are just needing the salt. Depending on your body type and your own individual needs, depending on your constitution, you're going to have different needs as compared to the next person. I think I've actually always been someone who doesn't need a ton of salt, because I've never really had huge cravings for salt, except for certain points in my life when I think I got quite low in sodium. And then your mind goes to things that are very salty. So if you find yourself craving junk food, like corn chips, any kind of chips really, you could have a bit of a salt deficiency. One of the major things that we get from consuming sodium chloride is the lowering of stress hormones in the body. So when you don't get enough sodium chloride to literally feed the adrenals, the RAAS system gets spiked upwards. That's the renin-angiostensin-aldosterone system. We'll just call it the RAS, or the RA system. So this has to do with the kidneys and regulating different fluids in the body. So you can imagine if your kidneys aren't working properly, your blood pressure can go up. So when you actually address that issue with the renin-angiotensin, then that can lower blood pressure, interestingly. And then the aldosterone is a stress hormone, along with adrenaline, which is the more widely known stress hormone, which both of these things you want to have relatively low. Of course, when you wake up, you want to have enough adrenaline to be able to not be groggy in the morning. But it is well known that salt actually lowers these things. And when people get older and they start having trouble sleeping, and perhaps they're taking medication, that further instigates more adrenaline production and more of an inability to sleep, because adrenaline causes an inability to sleep soundly and for long periods of time. They often find, and it's often told, that a little bit of salt will help offset that. There's a very quick test you can do, and of course this isn't going to be on par with doing a blood test and knowing your levels of stress hormones and thyroid health and other things. But if you go into a dark room, let your eyes adjust for about a minute, and have a flashlight with you, or I just tried it with a cell phone light, anything that produces light in a concentrated beam, but in the dark room, in the bathroom preferably, or anywhere where there's a mirror, you come up to the mirror in the dark and shine the light in your eye through the mirror so that you're looking at your one eye, and you observe your pupil. What should happen is that as soon as you turn that light on, you'll see that your pupil's big because you've allowed your eyes to adjust to the darkness a little bit for 1 to 5 minutes. So they'll be large, and you'll see your pupil reduce in size quite quickly. Now, if it's at that small point and it's wavering quite a bit, like, it's hard to describe, but if it's fluctuating too much, that means you could have an excess amount of aldosterone in your system. You're basically running on stress hormones. So one way to possibly lower that, if that is the cause, I'm not making any claims here, is to take in more sodium chloride. That's just simply adding it to food, adding it to drinks, putting a little bit in water, in the water you drink, and this overall is going to start to calm you down. And you might actually notice an actual effect of feeling more grounded, feeling less at the trigger with things if you're the type of person that's a little hot-headed, and you'll probably find that people actually notice a difference in your mood and behavior. So I still had this thing in my mind about why do animals in the wild go to this? What if they don't have salt licks in the wild, why would they develop a need for that high amount of salt? And as it turns out, animals, as well as our ancestors, all had access to salt, sodium in its various forms, in concentrated amounts, on the rare occasion. It's like finding a diamond in the rough. You would be going through the wild, you have no access to salt for days and days, then you might come across a tree that has been struck by lightning. The inside is all charred out, and one of the minerals that is concentrated down and basically made more available from burning plant material is sodium. So if you've ever actually tasted it, wood ash has a slightly salty flavor. Animals in the wild, as well as almost every indigenous culture that didn't have access to the ocean or the sea, where they would dehydrate water to collect their own salt, or if they didn't have access to brine springs further inland, then they would rely on burnt wood ashes for sodium carbonate. So it's not sodium chloride, but you still get the sodium, it still has that salty flavor, and it can be added to foods. And the interesting thing with wood ash, and using it almost like a supplement, is that it has a lot of other minerals in higher concentrations in there. You're going to get a lot of potassium, and that's the key also, because you want to have a roughly 2-to-1 ratio of potassium to sodium in everything you're taking into your body in terms of food. That's just generally recognized as a good ratio. Of course, it's going to be impossible to try and track that, so don't try and do that. But before you go out licking burnt trees or eating wood ashes from your campfire, you should definitely look into that if you want to know more about it. I know Dr. Joel Wallach has talked about that. That's where I first heard about it. A friend sent me some information about some of his work. He's done a lot of work on minerals, longevity, and things like that. There's specific types of woods you'd want to be able to use to do that. There's going to be some types of woods that might be a little bit toxic to do that with, so I wouldn't recommend doing that until you've done research, if that intrigues you. It is a practice our ancestors did, and that wild humans still do in the few areas of the world that these people still exist. And in the future, I do hope to make a video where I experiment with that a little bit, once I've delved into that a little bit more. Now, if you're saying, Zach, what about all the research showing that salt causes all sorts of problems? It can cause cancer, it can cause high blood pressure, heart disease, all these things. Well, again, as is the whole debate with animal foods versus plant-based diets, there's a lot of correlative studies out there that don't really prove much of anything. There's a lot of factors that go into people's lifestyles, so when you have people that in their mind think salt is a bad thing, so they say, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to exercise, eat well, eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and avoid salt, and you compare it to people who are eating processed food, McDonald's, all these other things, everything from a can, which is loaded with sodium, and it's really not the most ideal form of sodium. and they're having a high amount of salt intake in their diet and they have high blood pressure, and you do a study on large groups of these people and you compare the two, of course you're going to end up with the people with the horrendous diet, horrendous lifestyle having out of control health issues because of all the different factors that are causing their health issues, not just that one thing that you're trying to isolate, which is the sodium chloride. If you really want to look at some good research, check out Michael H. Alderman's research on PubMed or on Google Scholar. He's done a lot of studies that have clearly shown, and these are quite well designed studies with hundreds if not thousands of people, and they go over many years, and it was shown in these studies that increased mortality occurs the lower your salt intake goes. Of course, there's going to be a median where you want to stay behind. You don't want to go off the charts in terms of consuming tons of it, but you don't want to go too low either. So low salt diets increase mortality. It's really, at this point, quite clear that that's what occurs. There are some studies out there that show quite good control in terms of the way this study was designed, and they make the claim that, you know, salt increases blood pressure, but when you look at the fine print, it actually is a few points difference in terms of blood pressure. So you're talking, your blood pressure goes from 120 over 80 to 123 over 81. Wow, is that really increasing your risk for a heart attack? Not likely. And of course, there's going to be people that can actually lower their blood pressure from taking in more salt. So this is really self-experimental. If you want to explore this, just find a good high-quality salt. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg for, you know, black salt from Hawaii. If you want to, you could try that out. But, you know, I just have some sea salt, some regular Celtic sea salt. Easy to find in most health food stores, and just try putting that on a few things, see how you feel, add it to a little bit of water. I just put pinches on stuff all throughout the day, and then try going off it again and see the difference. Try and get your mind out of the idea of being addicted to salt, and just see the difference you feel in your body, not just the mouth craving. So try and see the difference between the two, and see if you feel more anxious without it. When people talk about salt increasing cancer rates, that's another thing that has to be looked at with some skepticism, because salt actually increases the uptake of nutrients or whatever it's being consumed with. So if you're eating a lot of processed food with salt, or chemically laden food with salt, or heavily deeply fried food with salt, the salt actually increases the uptake of those carcinogens. So when their studies have been very correlated in that they remove those factors, it's found that salt doesn't actually stimulate cancer cell growth, because it's not shunting, you know, all these toxins deep into the cellular matrix of our body. We're actually, if we're consuming something that's really heavily cooked, like for instance, you're at your grandparents' house and you're having a roast dinner. Yes, it's going to have that layer of, you know, I wouldn't call it burnt unless something bad happened in the oven, but you have that well-cooked meat, and there's a lot of less than ideal things that are created during that high cooking temperature over a long period of time. So one thing you can do to offset those negative qualities in the meat is not douse it in salt. So keep your salt with the foods that are maybe raw or less overcooked, and then eat your cooked foods with less salt. That's one strategy that could go in there, just to sort of optimize and minimize the absorption of possibly deleterious factors that are created from cooking. So if you start doing this, you start getting chapped lips, headaches, feeling bloated, constantly thirsty. These are all signs that you could be doing too much salt. So back off, just do little pinches here and there. No need to go up to like several teaspoons a day. We're talking about adding it in as opposed to dumping it in. Especially if you've been on a very low salt diet, you want to take it slow, add it in, and let your body adjust over time, which is just the wise thing to do with any dietary or lifestyle change. I just want to throw it out there. Another sign that you could be deficient in salt, if you've completely lost your ability to have a craving for it because you've been on an extreme no salt diet for so long. If you have low body temperature, cold hands and feet, adding a little bit of salt in your diet will actually start to warm up those parts of your body. It increases blood flow to those parts, it increases fluids in your body to be able to transport heat, and that is just another thing that might be a little sign that tells you it's time to add some salt back into your life. So with that, let me know in the comments below what you think, whether you like salt, have been always consuming it, if you went through a period of not liking it, if you're still anti-salt, and also check out the links below if there's any products you want to purchase through affiliates that I have listed there that help support me and continue putting out such great content. So with that, subscribe, and take care, and embrace life without limits. So that means you need to take in more sodium chloride.